In this series, Process takes you behind the scenes and into the creative mind of artist and musician Stanley Lake, co-founder in 1988 of Quebec's Tour des Arts. The series will be presented in 4 parts that describe the creative process that Stanley uses to create a water pond spitter. And now, heads up with Stanley Lake. This video is a compilation of 2 throwings that Stanley did in February 2021.
So welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to demonstrate the throwing of what will look like a vase, but eventually I will invert that and have the top of the vase that you'll see today become the foot of the pond spitter, which I'll decorate. And this is going to be in 4 parts, this video. The first, the making of the form. The second, part B, the trimming of the form. C, the decoration of the form. And then later in May of 2021, the firing of the form with many other pieces. But you'll get to see that process. So I'm going to start today. I've put a bat of wood on the metal frame of the wheel head. And this helps me, when I'm finished with the piece, to take the finished thrown piece off of the wheel head without distorting it. So here I'm working with it's about a 12 pound piece of clay. This is stoneware. We fire to a good cone 10 here at the studio. So I'll attach it to the piece of wood, and we call this a bat. And get it somewhat in the center of the wheel. Put a little water on it. First I'll turn the wheel on. Put a little water on the clay so my hands will slip through it. And then I start to center. The most important part is getting this attachment down here. The clay attached to the wooden bat or to the wheel head, so it doesn't fly off. So one of the most important things I tell students, or that I've learned really about centering, is if you can create non-movement, which in essence is you're creating a wall. Let's imagine a brick wall, and if that wall doesn't move, the clay has to conform to that wall. If the clay is pushing you around, then you'll never get it centered. So you have to be pretty rigid here and in this area too. So there's attachment of the arms to the legs. I'm applying equal pressure coming from the top. Essential that it gets centered at the wheel head. And you have to move clay around. Bring it up. Bring it down. And as a lubricant, I often like to use what we call the slip, which is just clay and water, like a yogurt consistency. And that's a nice lubricant. So here we have the clay pretty well centered. You can tell, and eventually you just feel that it's centered, but that would be an off-centered piece. It's wobbly. And one thing to remember, when you bring your hands away, you slowly release. If you come away quickly from the clay is going to follow you and be knocked off centered again. So centering is this process here, but really everything you do in the throwing of a piece of clay you have to be centered. So now that we've done that, it's pretty good. I'm going to make a well right in the middle. Go down close to the wheel head. And there you go. It's about 3 fingers wide at the top, a little narrower at the bottom. Normally in a vase, the base I want pretty solid so it doesn't tip over on someone's table. But this is a vase form, so I'm going to have it as a head eventually. So I want a tighter, well, not a narrower part at the bottom, so it's going to become a crown at the top. So normally where I'd have this open a little more at the bottom, I'm going to keep it somewhat closed. Now my first throwing part here is more of a compression, where I'm pushing clay with more of my open hand. Throwing normally is with getting underneath a ridge on the inside and outside and bringing that up, thinning out the clay. But this one I'm going to be pressing into my inside hand, but also moving up. I like a bit of a sponge here. Now I'm going to start, that was compression. So now I'm going to actually create a ridge underneath here, and on the inside a little bit of a ridge. My sponge is a bit wet, so it's going to add some lubricant as I move on up. You'll notice I don't add a lot of water to the body. Certainly in the beginning, as we were learning this, we use a lot of water, but the less water, even dry throwing, the thinner the piece you can get, the less working is required. The platelets of the clay don't get soaked, and therefore without a lot of water they can hold the structure up more than if they were soaking wet. So I keep water to a minimum, or I'll use slip as a lubricant. So here I've made this ridge at the bottom. Get under that with my sponge. And bring the clay up. I get to the top, and I'll bring my thumb of my right hand over the top and compress that. This helps strengthen that top if you keep compressing it there. A little bit of water on the inside, I direct it with my hand. Get under that ridge again. Pressing together, my hand from the inside and outside. Remember that wall, my arms are not moving. Come over the top and compress. Now obviously as I'm talking, I mean normally I wouldn't talk when I'm throwing, because that also sets up your body movements, your lungs breathing, so your chest going in and out can make the wall move. But pretty well okay here. Okay, now I'm going to do another pass. Pull that clay up, I'm thinning it down. Bring the clay in a bit. I'll probably do 2 more passes. I was taught somewhat of a what I would call bench-side apprenticeship with a wonderful potter on Cape Cod, Harry Hall, and he had studied with Soji Amada, a national treasure potter in Japan and with Bernard Leach from England, so two great masters. He had studied with them, and I did a bit of study with him. We became good friends. And his thing was, in 3 passes, 3 pulls, get it done, and then work on the form itself. And on these larger pieces, I require a little bit more than 3 passes. So I'm going to bring this up 1 or 2 more times. And you'll see I have a fair amount of clay. Actually, when I get done with the piece, I'll have a fair amount of clay here, because that's holding the form. It's like an engineering project where you have to have a foundation that can hold the form. You have to have a foundation that is strong enough that when you start putting a belly on the form, it can be strong enough to hold the torque that's happening as you manipulate the clay. I'll trim off that extra at the end of the session, but not all of it, and tomorrow I'll trim off the rest. So I want to get rid of any water that's down at the bottom. And I'm going to do one more pass. Just make that a little wetter. And bring up a little more of the clay that's down here. Sometimes you'll get a little weaker area there, or you'll get a bit of torque. And just with this rib, it's a piece of wood. You can get them in different shapes. This, I like the hard edge of it. And I'll push from the inside out to the rib, just to make it more uniform. Clean up some of the throwing lines if I don't want them. Sometimes you'll want them, so that cleans that up a bit. And now I'm going to, I often think of a pot as having a foot, a belly, and a neck. So here's the neck, the belly. I'm going to belly this out. I'm going to be pushing from the inside out to my hand or out to the rib to give it a little more shape. I'll do that here. That gives me a bit of a belly there, and I'll lubricate the top, and I'll what's called necking. I'm going to squeeze the clay in very slowly, and that's going to change the direction of where we were going, but also thickens up the clay in this area. You're compressing it a bit. So I will go back into this area and throw it, thin it out a bit. Come over the top, compress that top again, go back and neck it again, and then make sure I have the relationship between the belly and the neck, have a nice flow there. Establish that, and even bring this out a little bit more. pushing from the inside. Going back here to get that nice flow. Okay, now I'm going to start flaring this out a bit. And I'll show you the use of the needle tool here just to even off the top. I put the tool over my thumb and just let it cut into the clay. Just take that off so you get a more even top. So now I'm going to squeeze in a bit more. So remember, in this form, the top here is going to be the bottom of the head that I'm going to make. So I want it to be somewhat substantial and wide enough to support the form. So I'm pushing that out, working on that area, throwing it out a bit. And I remember my first pottery course in university. It's in my senior year, and watching the professor throw a pot, make a pot on the potter's wheel, and just fascinated by every little touch he did changed the appearance of the pot, and it was just mesmerizing to me, and that began my addiction to learning how to throw, for sure. Okay. I'm going to bring this in a bit and accent it a bit. Just all these little points of pressure keep changing the form. I'm going to flatten this down a bit and also compress the edges. This line a little better. Just a demarcation of where things start, where things end. So here's the body, and that tells you that's the top, the opening, or in this case, the foot. So making lines that tell the looker, the person looking at it, that something's happening at that point. Bring your attention to that point. And if you have a certain glaze, that glaze will accent these lines that you make too. So I think we're almost done here. Just check the form down here. Get that flow. And now I'm going to take off the extra clay that's right down here with my tool, my rib. I'm not going to take too much off, but a fair amount. So I use both hands just to guide it. Bit of strength there. Come down to the wheel head. You see that? And I'll make a cut out here. Then I'll get underneath that extra clay and just peel it off now. Easier said than done, but there you go. So that was giving it some support. There's still enough clay at the bottom that we still have support down there. I'll clean up this a little bit more. And this is a Brent potter's wheel that I purchased in 1975, and it's just been great, a real workhorse. We would go through 2 tons when I was working full-time, 2 tons of clay a year. Now we're down to about a ton of clay, but it's been powerful for that. I do a lot of hand building and throwing. In the beginning, quite a bit of throwing. I've had to change the motor once, maybe about 5 years ago. Other than that, it's been great. So highly recommended. So here we go with that. And let's see if I can just take I think I'm going to work this a little bit more. More of a flare. And take the bat off of the wheel head, just using a knife. That's that. Lift it off. Keep it straight. Put it on my table. And there you go. That's the form, and tomorrow it'll be dry enough that I'll be able to turn it upside down, center it on the wheel head, trim off this extra, make it into more of a cone, and then start decorating it. All right, well, thanks for being here, and see you tomorrow.
Let's have a quick review of Stanley's process of throwing. So we hope you enjoyed this presentation of Process, and please feel free to hit the like button. In the next 3 videos, we will be showing you how the form is trimmed, how it's transformed into a head, and finally, in May 2021, the firing process. Please check out the links below for other videos created by the team at Cooking Mind Productions, Quebec. Thank you.